Exactly. The United States will be remembered as a very superficial empire. And they weren't a military empire or an industrial empire. They were a cultural empire.
Oh, no, they were a fine military empire. They kicked Hitler's butt.
They certainly didn't kick Hitler's butt. The Russians
Absolutely. No, without the Americans and the Canadians, England would have been shot away in the war. We would be speaking German now.
Absolutely untrue. The Russians
Totally true.
How many American servicemen lost their lives during the Second World War?
I don't know.
Would you like to have a guess if I told you that up to 6 million Russians died?
Yes.
How many Americans died?
356,000.
Less than that.
200,000.
Around about that.
Well, they big sacrifice on their part.
This is less than Yugoslavia.
Yes, but the Americans came over and they pepped us all up. They gave us the spirit, and without them, we would have been, as I said, we would be stomping around in big long boots at the moment.
You've been fed the history lessons that the English wanted you to hear, and you've had that topped up with plenty of Hollywood movies which suggested that Errol Flynn won the Second World War. The simple fact of the matter is that the Russians defeated Hitler. The Russians defeated Hitler, and they don't get any credit for it. In actual fact, quite the opposite. Our propaganda machines in the West took over and delivered a verdict on the Russian hierarchy immediately after the Second World War, which was a damning one, a blackening one.
Yeah, indeed.
They haven't managed to shake off that image yet. But the simple fact of the matter is that democracy in Europe was secured by the blood of 6 million Russian or more. Some put the figure as high as 13 million Russians in the Second World War.
Defeated communism, and they've also defeated terror by bombing Afghanistan and catching Saddam Hussein.
Have they defeated communism? Isn't it a communist regime in China?
Not anymore. It's a free economy in China. It's subject to certain regulations.
In other words, it's a terrific amalgam, isn't it, of socialism and capitalism? Yeah.
Yeah, but the Chinese, they're all a bit, they're still on certain websites, so I wouldn't be happy with them. I'd rather be in California than in Beijing.
The American dream, is a mixture of capitalism and fantasy. The Chinese dream is a... Thank you for your call. The Chinese dream is a mixture of social conscience and wealth. Go ahead on line 4. Hello.
Hello, it's Viktor. How are you doing, Tommy?
Very well, thank you for your call. Where are you calling from this evening?
I'm in Gdańsk, which is very north of Poland, where the shipyards were, which actually overthrew, they say, communism. And we in Russia, of course, were very happy in the end that communism was overthrown. What we have to remember is, I think, first I like to say thank you for being fair about what the Russians have done for the rest of humanity 60 and 70 years ago. We certainly behave in a way which is heroic, not for the first time. We sought out Europe problems. Also, we did this for Napoleon, who otherwise, if not for Russia, would be, you would all be speaking French, not German or Russian.
If my history teacher was right, Charles XII of Sweden, who tried to do before them what Napoleon and Hitler failed to do.
Yes, also the Swedes in their time were very expensive people and tried to do a lot of damage for their own benefit to larger parts of Northern Europe. Poland as well was under Swedish flood, and some people say, of course, that even Russian state in the region was founded by Swedes, but this is a matter for longer debate, not really what I wanted to mention. I wanted to say, just remind about the communism, that when in the beginning, when over 100 years ago, communism was being worked out by people theoretically, and more than 100 years ago. Mainly this was not Russians. If you think about Karl Marx, where is he buried? He's buried in your Highfield Cemetery in London, isn't he?
Yes.
He lived mainly he lived in England, And mainly this was Germans and other people, many of them living in Britain. And in Russia there was an immediate appeal of the ideas of communism, but it's not an idea which actually come from Russia in the first place. And in fact, the people who were responsible for communist theory, they probably were people that thought completely sincerely that this would be the answer for humanity's problems. But of course it is not, because it doesn't take into account the human nature. It believes that you can educate people to get rid of their selfishness. But this is unfortunately not true. You cannot, simply by education or good example or even by propaganda, turn people into something what they're not. There is a limit to the amount in which you can train people. What you can do is you can get people to work for money, but you cannot get them to work purely for the idea. And that's why the capitalism is basically won over from communism. But what we really have these days is capitalist systems having included the best of communist thinking anyway, so that in a way, parts of the West, especially Great Britain, which have now taken over the banking system, renationalized it practically, is more communistic than Russia is today.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Okay. Well, I think you make some good points. But I want to talk about how we're going to remember the United States of America this evening, because I believe that Obama's inauguration on the 20th of January will be something of a funeral peroration for the state's reign as a superpower, which is clearly coming to an end. And in Russia, which you mention, and you know more about than I do, recently a popular vote was held to name the greatest heroes in Russia. And when they did this in the United Kingdom a year or so ago, the likes of Brunel, a scientist, and Churchill, of course, a leader.
Well, he was partly American, of course.
He said, did he not? If his father had been his mother and his mother had been his father, he would have probably made it to the Senate on his own.
Yes, very possibly.
But do you suppose that if the Americans, the Russians, by the way, I believe, had Stalin in third place in their list?
No, I would really doubt that Russians like Stalin like this. You know, he is not popular in Russia itself. Among Russian people, they do not like Stalin.
I'm going to take a break. Stay with us, Victor.
Georgians who like Stalin.
You stay there, Victor, and we'll talk to America with Victor in just a moment. It's Global News Talk tonight. We're talking about how the world is going to remember the United States if, as looks likely, the United States is going to be swiftly overtaken by the coming industrial and military giants in China, Asia, and the subcontinent. In so many ways, America is summed up by what might just be their greatest legacy in decades to come, which is world wrestling entertainment, because it will endure, because it's brilliantly performed but incredibly superficial. It's multiracial. It's about fighting. It's about violence. It's about showmanship. It's about oratory skills. But ultimately, with the man who owns it, one of the richest and most influential men in the world, it's about financial success. And I can't think of a single concoction that would be a more appropriate way of remembering the United States than pro wrestling.
Tommy Boyd on Play 2 UK, a supersong of sanctity in a weird and wacky world.
It's Global News Talk tonight. Viktor is on the line still in Gdansk. Yes, Viktor?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Tommy.
And Steve is on the line in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Steve.
Hello.
Hi, Steve.
Hello, Viktor.
So how's the States going to be remembered then, Steve, if it comes down to it, and this is the beginning of the end of the reign of the United States of America? What's the world going to thank you for?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, because, does one think of one thing when looking back at a culture?
Several. You get a kind of a feeling of what it was all about. The Alexander and the Romans, that was about conquest. Same with Napoleon. The British would tell you it was about bringing civilization to the rest of the world.
I mean, you could argue they're all about conquest.
Yeah. And they brought different things. The Romans brought a certain kind of technology, architecture. I refer you to the life of Brian for what the Romans did for Britain.
Well, what did the Romans
and the rest of their empire?
Exactly.
Are you touchy about the idea that the United States is sliding into decline?
Well, I guess I would argue that what was possibly considered great about the United States was possibly due for a redefinition. And hopefully with the next president, we can redefine what it means to be a great nation.
And what might that be?
Well, it would probably have less to do with conquest and more to do with wrestling.
I thought long and hard about putting forward the idea that WWE sums up the American image, if not the American...
But the flaw in that
is
that Vince McMahon wasn't powerful enough to keep the name WWF, which was owned by a bunch of hippies, in the World Wildlife Fund.
Has it dented the ratings?
I don't know about that, but it just shows you that he's not as influential as you think.
Well, maybe nor is the United States.
But the World Wildlife Fund is.
Say again?
But the World Wildlife Fund is.
Yeah.
Well, if you believe certain people, I think even James Whale was talking about that on his Play Radio show, that the environmental lobby is, in cahoots with the government to raise taxes and rule the world.
Yeah, we do conspiracies on Thursdays. Right now we're asking how are we going to remember the United States, because when you look at the other great empires, they all had a rise and fall. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire, the rise and fall of the Third Reich, the rise and fall of the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
There's always been a moment when those empires started to go into decline.
Yes, and Stanley Gibbons, who did the stamp album about the fall of the Roman Empire, he blamed it all on the Christians, if you remember.
Yeah.
You remember Stanley Gibbons and his stamp catalogue of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire?
Yes. Well said.
They haven't been helping out too much around here either.
I just had a little time to think, Tommy and Steve, in the break, about what America would be remembered by, and I think it's three main things. The first thing would be the whole of Hollywood and the American film industry, and most of all, the crowning achievement of that part would be Dallas series. That I think everybody will remember. Who Shot JR, etc. That's probably third place. Second place is probably the fast food, of which you got a lot of examples, Subways and what have you, but the crowning one is probably McDonald's. because this defined the globalist approach to restaurant and everything being the same. Everybody talk about the McDonald's approach, and it really made the world a lot smaller, unfortunately, as well as making a lot of people much, much fatter. But I think
technically the original McDonald's were probably Scottish.
Well, you know, Tommy says that he doesn't really believe much about the Scottish myth anyway, so it's, I think that they probably were...
what are you guys talking about? There is no MacDonald. It's got nothing to do with Scotland.
I didn't say it was. He said it was.
No, he said it was. And he's talking crap.
So
deliberately, because he's just trying to make sure that we're on our toes when it comes to our in-depth understanding of American culture. And it was a nice try in Atlanta, Georgia, but bono.
Can I say what I think
was founded by a guy called Ray Kroc.
Yeah, as in...
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Which is what they make their hamburger from, maybe, allegedly.
But for God's sake, let's not say that Hollywood is a great institution, because if you think about...
I did not say that. I said it was what would be remembered.
Of course. You know, Potemkin, Bergman.
I love when the pram come down the stairs in this film.
Everybody does, except the Americans. They don't know what the fuck you're talking about if you say Potemkin.
Yeah, but The Godfather.
Scorsese, it's Italian.
And
no.
Yeah, Coppola is Italian, but I mean he's an Italian-American.
Yeah. Pacino.
Do you get his wine over there?
Kurosawa. Buñuel.
Ray. I mean, we can list...
All right, let's talk about art. Let's talk about art.
Bondarchuk make best film ever in the whole world. Sergei Bondarchuk's War and Peace.
What's the greatest American novel?
The greatest American novel?
Catcher in the Rye.
Or Catcher in the Rye, or play. Has America produced a Shakespeare yet? No. A Da Vinci yet? No. A Picasso? No. They've got Whistler. And Robert Frost. He wrote some nice poems, the kind that you see in women's magazines.
Andy Warhol.
I don't think it's part of his 15 minutes anymore, is it?
No. So we can't say that America is going to leave a
He's greatly influenced popular culture.
We can't say that America is going to leave... We're talking about America's legacy, what America is going to leave behind when it vacates center stage, which is imminent.
I said that the third place would be the Hollywood, the second place would be the fast food, but crowning place of all, I am sure, what we in Russia will remember United States for, is Miss South Carolina.
Miss South Carolina and Triple H.
Very probably.
Yeah. Mind you, is it not inevitable that popular culture will be the lasting legacy of all great civilizations and empires to come?
Well, I mean, maybe Shakespeare was, you know, the...
WWE of its time? I don't think so.
Well, I mean, I would imagine it was a lot rowdier than the theater is today.
It was rowdy, but it spoke of great things in the hearts and minds of men and women who aspire to some depth. And WWE, it does not do that. And Dallas didn't do that. And maybe the wrestler does. But hey, look, here we are talking about, is WWE going to be the thing that America is best summed up by? And look, the big movie, the great movie, the one that's already being talked of as being the Oscar-winning movie and the Oscar-winning performance, is about wrestling. Catherine Catt was talking about it on In the Dungeon with Catherine Catt earlier. So
she probably knows some of the moves.
But couldn't you say that our legacy will be a legacy of change, in that, you know, we started, you know, the country where, you know, one group of people was enslaved, and, you know, a son of someone who's from Africa is now the president.
Well, let's remember he's British and born in Hawaii.
British?
Barack Obama was born with a British passport.
That's interesting.
You did not know that?
That's something I've never heard.
Yeah, there was actually an injunction taken out against him which ran through the courts in Washington between his election and tomorrow's inauguration, which was thrown out. But his father, a Kenyan national, had a British passport when Barack was born.
Oh, his father had a British passport, okay.
Yes. And my understanding is that that's the passport.
You know, if you're born in America and one of your parents is an American citizen, then you're an American citizen.
Well, was his father an American citizen?
One of your parents has to be an American citizen.
Ah, okay. But back in those days, the father was far more important than the mother. And maybe in America it's still the case.
In this case, he buggered off.
But yeah. I'm sorry to have to bring you the news, but Barack Obama technically is British, which means that he's just...
I know he's a West Ham fan.
He's just another... I don't know, black West Ham fans.
No, I think he's more British than Churchill.
That wasn't just a wisecrack remark. He is a West Ham fan since a visit to London about 10 years ago.
Okay. Victor made a good point.
Yes, he's more British than Winston Churchill.
About the same.
Or Queen Victoria.
About the same. They both had a British father and an American mother.
Maybe he will be the new Winston Churchill. He will fight us on the beaches.
He does smoke.
Yes, I find that endearing. I find that truly endearing in the guy.
that there's something wrong with him, or that there's something that's not perfect about him?
That he says two fingers to the Grim Reaper in the way that so many of us do with all our little vices. I'm going to die. I want to play a part in that. It's very Bushido.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, indeed. Victor, thank you for your company this evening. I appreciate it. I hope the weather turns in Gdansk.
Yes, it's a little bit cold here now, -6 outside.
Yeah, it's nothing compared to what they got in Washington. I'm going to be looking in 2 or 3 reasons tomorrow. One of them is just to see how they deal with the frost on their breath turning to snow and ice.
Is it supposed to be cold down there?
Say again, in Atlanta?
Is it supposed to be cold down there?
In Washington?
Yeah.
Potomac's solid, frozen. 2 feet
Really?
ice, 2 feet of ice.
Christ.
Yeah.
It's totally warm around here.
Good night, Victor. Thank you.
Good night.
Nice guy.
Very.
So while I got you then, Steve, in Atlanta, it's a serious point I want to make. The American rule. And as Ricky Gervais put it when he picked up some award or another in New York or in Hollywood, you know, the guy, the office guy?
Yes.
He said, we're British. We used to run the world before you. And everybody got it. Because certainly since the fall of communism, America has had a clean run at it. But you've got to see that that's ending, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, you know, it's how we accept our new role in the world.
What will that be?
Well, I still think it will be a more advanced one than some of the emerging countries like China and India. And I think it all depends on how well Europe integrates. I mean, so many people are against that. Whereas, you know, you have the opportunity to become this real superpower, and I guess it scares the shit out of people.
See, I think you're thinking without basic human psychology here. When there's been a big guy in the playground or on the global scene, when he's down, everyone wants to kick him. That's what happened with the Roman Empire. It was smashed, obliterated. People were dancing on the grave of whoever the last emperors were. Ditto with the Third Reich, and ditto with the British Empire, because although it kind of ended in a very typically British, genteel, diplomatic way, with the lowering of the Union flag and the raising of the flag in India and Australia and New Zealand and Canada and so on and so on and so on, the Brits didn't get kicked so much as ridiculed and reviled. And nobody wanted to talk to Britain for a long, long while, and in fact they still don't. You ought to see how they vote in the Eurovision Song Contest. They still hate us in Estonia. And we were never there. You see my point? Now this could happen, almost certainly will happen, to the United States. You're going to be either a joke or you're going to be crushed.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it doesn't really bother me because I've never taken my identity from the 300 million people who live around me.
Good point. Good point. Well, keep your Skype lines open. Always good to talk to you.
Bye-bye.
Steve in Atlanta. We're doing a Global News Talk special tonight, talking about the way in which America is going to be remembered, since it's quite possible that the inauguration of Barack Obama could turn out to coincide with the beginning of the decline and fall of the American empire. And does America have an empire? Sure does. Doesn't own India and Australia as the British Empire did. Doesn't own the Spanish Peninsula and most of Europe as the Napoleonic era empire did. But it's a cultural empire. It's an economic empire, or at least it was. And let's face it, America had the rest of the world by the balls for the last 15 to 20 years. And where would the rest of the world have been without American invention in the Second World War and in the First World War? Fight as they did against their policy of isolationism? Some people listening will say, we need to say thank you to the United States, otherwise, quote a line from earlier, we'd all be speaking German. But somehow there's this thing that people like to kick the big kid in the playground when he's down. And this might just be what's happening at the moment. Because most of the world's leaders are just fighting slightly shy of saying that the economic shit, pardon my French, the economic shit that we're in at the moment is not the fault of a few bankers, as I heard one Prime Minister say today. We all know it is the fault of the American banking system. And who wants to kick the big kid in the playground when he's down? Most of all, it's the kids who've still got bruises from what the big kid did.